as our clerk today. Miss Smith is out today, so we welcome Miss Warren to come in as our clerk today. So thank you. Thank you for stepping in, Jamia. We appreciate you.
Anytime.
And if you have questions along the way, I know this is your first time kind of, clerk for us officially, but if you have questions or need some help, please feel free to ask and or have us slow down. And but today should be a pretty straightforward meeting. So
Gotcha.
With that, we will. I will go ahead and call this meeting to order, and I will say, what a beautiful Friday afternoon we are having. Hopefully, you've got a chance to get outside and enjoy a little bit of this beautiful weather. And I'm grateful for your time today, to the board and anybody else that's watching currently. We want to welcome Marcia that is with us from KESB as well. So thank you for taking time to be with us and share your experiences and expertise with us. I'm looking forward to a very great conversation today. I'm going to go ahead and read our board norms and protocols as we do at every board meeting. So as a board, we agree to respect the differences of opinions and making decisions for the district, to follow best practices in managing the superintendent and the management of the board itself, to stay on task when conducting business for the district, including while at board meetings, to never surprise the superintendent or each other when conducting official business of the district, to read these norms at the beginning of each board meeting and at board workshops as a reminder of how to conduct our meetings, and to continually self-check to determine if we are following our norms when conducting district business. So with that, Ms. Warren, would you do a roll call, please?
Sure. Randy Lopez.
Randy Lopez present.
Jeannie Humphreys.
Jeannie Humphreys present.
Maxine Drew.
Maxine Drew present.
Dr. Valdenia Nguyen.
Valdenia Nguyen present.
Dr. Stacy Yeager.
Stacy present.
Wanda Page.
Wanda Page present.
And do I read the superintendent, Alicia Miguel?
I'm here.
No, you just read.
I think you missed, and you missed Miss Yolanda Clark, but she is not able to join us today.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. And with that, I would take a motion to approve today's special agenda.
So moved. Second.
So it was moved by Ms. Drew and seconded by Dr. Yeager. Go ahead and do a roll call for vote, please, Ms. Warren.
We're going to do a roll call for vote. Randy Lopez.
Randy Lopez, yes.
Jeannie Humphreys.
Jeannie Humphreys, yes.
Maxine Drew.
Maxine Drew, yes.
Dr. Valdenia Nguyen.
Dr. Nguyen, yes.
Dr. Stacy Yeager.
Stacy, yes.
Yolanda Clark. She's not present today, so we'll make a note.
And did you get Ms. Page, or was there anybody else?
And I'm sorry, and Wanda Page.
Present. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, so with that, we'll jump right in to our KASB training. Again, I want to welcome Marcia Westman with KASB. She has done some training and facilitation with us previously, and we're grateful to have her back to continue this conversation. I'll just share briefly. In preparing for this meeting, we were able to meet with Marcia, Stacy, and I, and just kind of talk about the agenda. And the three of us felt, and I think we've had this conversation as a board, that these discussions are so important for us, especially given this time where we are working on ourselves as a board, and as we are searching for our permanent superintendent position. This is a great time for us to just think about our own norms, our own values, our mission, and how we can, share that with our current superintendent and staff, but also as we undergo the search for the permanent superintendent. So we're so grateful for Marcia's time, and this will be a great conversation. And I would just encourage all of our board members to ask questions, to participate as you feel is necessary. And I'm sure Marcia has ways of calling on people. So with that, Marcia, it's all yours.
Okay, and I'm not sure, Randy, if it was your internet or mine, but you froze a couple of times, so I hope it wasn't mine. But
Sorry.
it is, it might have been me, so you need to, somehow if we can communicate if I'm freezing, let me know. I have to tell you, it is so great to see you all again. I just feel like I've become attached to you, and so I was so afraid that somebody would want to take you away from me. So I look forward to continuing to work with you. And what really kind of fits what I want to say right now is, who in the world would have ever thought when you all ran for the board that the job would look like this right now? I mean, this is unprecedented, and I know people keep saying that, but you are doing very difficult work and not always appreciated for it. So I, for one, want to thank you very much. It's a Friday afternoon, and once again, you're volunteering your time because you care about your community and you care about your kids. So thank you very much. Just want to throw that in there right away. So we've had some conversations about things to cover, and I kind of ended up with notes that would cover 20 hours. So tried to boil things down a little bit, because really it's an ongoing conversation. And we have looked at some dates for maybe 2 more. So my hope is that if we continue on those 2 more dates, we can kind of work our way through some of the conversations we've had. So for today, what I thought might fit is, one, this ongoing conversation is, what do effective boards look like, and how are we measuring ourselves against that? We talked about norms last time. And, you read the norms at the beginning, so I want to kind of drill down on that a little bit. And I hear, pardon the pun, I hear you all voice frequently how important it is to you to represent your community, and amplify those voices, of the people in your district. And so I want to have a little conversation about what that looks like and how that influences you as board members and your interactions with each other, in terms of if there is ever concern on your part that as an individual board member, perhaps you don't feel like you're getting the opportunity to make sure you can amplify the voices that you want. And then because of timeliness, new superintendent, go through the superintendent evaluation process, and then talk about some next steps. Is there anything that you want to discuss about this before I move on? Does that fit? Okay, I'll tell you what, my cursor seems to move quickly. Okay, so I've told you all before that, I do a lot of social emotional stuff and trauma stuff. And so, I think it's really important that anytime we have a meeting, we pull people together and we try to continue to build those connections. And as board members, that is even more important, because we know when you have to have difficult conversations, if you've built relationships where you've been able to allow yourselves to be vulnerable with each other and feel safe doing it, it makes it easier to have those difficult conversations and, arrive at decisions where you can then walk away from the decisions being united. So this may look like it doesn't fit with what we're doing, but part of trauma-informed organizations is giving people lots of choice. So I thought we could do a quick little activity to build connections today, but I built choice into it. And so if each of you would be willing to choose one of these three things, share either a rose and a thorn, so a silver lining that's emerged, or a challenge related, either related to school or personally in this pandemic environment. What's something good that's emerged or something bad? Or if you don't want to do that, perhaps you could share, if you were isolated in a cabin and you had one match, would you light a candle, a kerosene lamp, or the fireplace first, and tell us why? So that helps us learn a little bit about your thinking. Or would you like to complete this sentence? I'm blank and I'm ready to blank. Now, when I saw this, excuse me, I don't want to cough in the microphone. I don't know if you remember during the 2008 election, I think she was like a little old woman, and she said, so President Obama was speaking, and she said, I'm fired up and I'm ready to go. And that eventually became kind of a campaign slogan. But the contrast was this just little bitty woman with these big old words. So as individuals, if you would be willing to choose one of these, and since we're on Zoom and it would be easier if I say your name just because of the order you are on my screen, if you need more time to think, just say pass, because passing is always an option, and we'll go. So Randy, would you be willing to share first?
I knew I would be the first one.
Because you knew you would be in that first box on my screen.
That's right. I will go with the third option there. So I'll say I'm optimistic and excited, and I'm ready to lean, learn, and listen today.
Good. Thank you. Wow, he set the bar high, didn't he? Dr. Nguyen, are you ready?
Well, sure. I'm looking at the middle option, and I'm making an assumption that there's kerosene in the lamp.
Oh,
and
good point.
And there's firewood.
Okay.
So I'll take the fireplace so that at least maybe we'll be warm through the night.
Okay, thank you. Janie, are you ready?
Well, I'm taking the middle option, but I'm going to light the candle first because I know exactly how to light the candle, and sometimes when you light the fireplace, you have to relight it. And you start with the candle and you go from there to the fireplace. And the kerosene lamp, I'm not too sure about.
Okay. Thank you. See, Janie exposed some vulnerability there. Miss Drew.
Thank you. I took the first one, and a rose is for me to always do what I think is best, trying to do that. And then a thorn is, I never like to argue about anything. I always like to resolve and fix it.
Okay. Thank you. Miss Page.
If I'm being honest right now, I'm tired and I'm ready to lay down.
Okay.
If I'm being politically correct, I'm excited and I'm ready to work.
So maybe today I'm tired and I'm ready to lay down, but by Monday I'll be, I forgot your first word, excited and ready to work.
Yeah.
True? Okay. All right, Dr. Miguel. Whoops, you're muted.
I was trying to get to the microphone before somebody told me I was muted. my thought was immediately, I'm humbled, and I'm humbled by the enormity of the task that we have in front of us, and the responsibility that we have as in the role that I have now, and the board in the midst of this crazy pandemic. But I'm ready to learn, because something I have learned is we never stop learning. If we truly want to tackle the challenges in front of us, that's what I love to do, learn. So today, this is completely new for me. I'm so ready to learn.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Yeager.
I would say I'm exhilarated, and I am ready to roll and move and shake things up to go. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Jamia, would you be willing to share?
Sure. I'm happy and I'm ready to celebrate. I'm a Halloween person.
Oh. Okay, thank you. And Rashid?
Yes.
Did you see what I showed on the screen?
Kind of. I'm doing other things. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I just like to involve everyone who is present. So, would you like to answer one of those three questions? Or if you are otherwise occupied, just say, I need to pass. That's perfectly okay.
I need to pass.
All right.
Sorry.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, it is good to see you all, and learn a little bit about you, a little more about you each time that we do this. So I'm pretty sure I showed this last time, and just in one of our one of our leadership team meetings at KSB, we had conversations about this picture again, just with some work we were doing. And it kind of came back to me again, in a lot of different contexts. And I'm just curious if anybody, sees this, if there's any particular, situation that it makes you think of, or, that you think it particularly applies to. Just feel free to unmute and speak.
So I'll chime in. I'm thinking back on the presidential debate that happened a couple of weeks ago, and where we had the president and the vice president really just, I don't even know if I would call it a debate, but just the debacle that happened. And it's us, residents and citizens who suffer. It's our programs that suffer when our leaders display what they displayed on the debate stage that night. Tough to watch, and it's us folks, everyday folks that are hurting, and that didn't help any of us, I don't think.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Well, it's the same thing as when parents disagree at home, when they argue in front of their children. It's the children that are the most affected by it. They pick up they get anxious and show anxiety when their parents are arguing in front of them.
Okay. And Janie, that reminds me sometimes of situations with custody challenges between
custody disputes and stuff. Yeah, the children are the one that are suffering.
Okay. Ms. Drew, were you starting to speak?
Well, Janie touched on what I was going to mention just a little bit, because I can remember growing up and there were issues, but it was not presented to us as children. And one of the things I've learned is when you are having some issues, it's not necessary to bring it always to the forefront, but to work behind the scenes sometime to fix it and resolve it. And that way you can continually put out an image of moving forward in a positive way.
Okay. Well said. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. I will move forward. So, did somebody start to speak? I know
You
it
know,
takes a minute sometimes to
Yeah, I
mute.
started because we live in such a world that it scares me sometimes, or maybe it's just the way I was raised. My mother and father, they spoke their mind, and my grandmother was brutal. And at times it was hard, but I appreciated that because I felt like it made me a better person, that I wasn't afraid to speak my mind, and they wanted us to speak up. And I guess I enjoy a good fight, or maybe I'm crazy, but that's just my personality, that my parents always made us speak up, stand up, because if you don't stand up, you'll fall for anything. And I'm going through a situation now with my sorority where people didn't say what they really felt at a meeting and let it go, and then got home and wanted to talk about it. And then it just led to some unnecessary situations because they felt like, well, if I had said something, I would have been a dream killer. But you still should have said it because now you want to talk about it. And you should have spoke up at the time. And that's the thing that bothers me sometimes, that people need to speak up. And I get that we want to work it and kumbaya, all that's okay. But at times we got to deal with it. And no, it's not fun. It's not a happy, but I think you can work through, even through the dust, whatever. But you got to speak up. We live in a society. Sometimes if you don't say anything and you're trying to get along, it doesn't always work to your advantage. You get lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, and that actually segues to one of the objectives I put for today is, who in our community is perhaps not having their voice heard for whatever reason, and, whose voices are being heard. So, as we talk about board member roles, you really allude to that whole idea of the parking lot meetings where you hold your opinion during the meeting when it matters, and you save it for later. And the responsibilities that we have when we are part of a governing team, we have a responsibility to share our opinions. So part of why we do the kumbaya stuff is to make us more comfortable when we do say difficult things. And kumbaya is the word I usually use when I'm telling people, I have a real reason for doing this. But, just kind of sharing a little bit of ourselves makes it easier than sometimes when we have to say something that's really hard. So in a family, like when you're talking about your parents, sometimes when you know that unconditional love is there, it's easier to go out on a limb and say something that's harder than when there's uncertainty, about that. So those raise some good points that segue into what we're doing. Anyone else want to respond? Okay, so we talked about norms last time, and continuing to read the norms again. I wondered if we could have a little conversation about that. We had talked about maybe revisiting what the norms are, but what I wondered, just as I've looked at some of your board meetings and done things, I wondered if there might be some value in taking your current norms and kind of like we did the big self-assessment, if I were to send individual self-assessments with your norms on them and have you as individual members kind of keep track through a meeting, and at the end of the meeting, just kind of self-evaluate yourself using the norms, as the metric. If you did that for 2 or 3 meetings, and then we sent out if I sent like a survey monkey that you could just kind of record yourself, it'd be anonymous. So it could be kind of like that self-eval. We don't know who said what, but we could get a sense of how you as individuals believed you were following those norms. Because before we change the norms, maybe we should see if the ones that you're using are good, but we just haven't really, internalized them yet. Thoughts that you have about that?
I feel that would be a good thing to do, to be able to let us do a reflection, not just for looking at others, but to look at ourselves.
The challenge I have is that there's one that is just, honestly, is comical to me. The one about no surprises. So it's not a two-way street. The board is presented with surprises, not knowing anything, not being told. But then when one proposes, presents, it's all of a sudden like, oh my God, that was a surprise. So it's comical to me, that one.
Okay. So if we may, I was thinking of ease when I was talking about tallying, but you raise a point. Like if there's a particular one that as an individual you feel like you can't adhere to for whatever reason. So comments to that. So like what you just said, if we could get that kind of information from people, then if different norms are needed for reasons like that.
I'm not saying one cannot adhere to it. I'm saying it's not practiced by either the board or the administration.
Okay. So, but that's what I'm thinking, that by writing that down as a comment, as opposed to just a tally, it kind of helps better inform what would we need to change to make the norms work. Like that gives us an idea of what we need to look at.
I would agree. And I also think, interpretation is everything, because we as a board, if we're go and agree to them, then that means everyone then needs to be held accountable, rather than saying, oh, it's not something that's relative and that it doesn't make sense. Well, if I myself have been adhering to the board norms and it is something that's valuable, for instance, it is very important that, there are no surprises. But as it was mentioned, there are board members who do not respect it. So that's why we have the differing of opinions. And I like the idea of really being able to self-reflect and then come back and talk about it, because I believe it is something that we need to look at more seriously and then define. Because what is defined as a surprise? What is defined, or what is our protocol? If there's a written protocol or people do not follow protocol, then you're on a different page. For instance, if we say, well, a surprise would be X, Y, and Z, then everybody would understand, okay, well, that's outside the bounds of what we agreed on. I think a lot of times, maybe interpretation of what that norm exactly is would also go into analyzing when we rebuild or reflect, because we could look at it and say, okay, well, what exactly does it mean to respect differences and making decisions for the district? What does that exactly mean?
Which ties back to what Ms. Page said, because you can say something very difficult, as she was talking about, that has to be said, and it doesn't necessarily mean disrespect. So that raises a good point that ties into what she said before.
Right. And then, so I think it's important for us to know and reflect on, and just like, what is best practice for managing the superintendent? We keep talking about, we know there's a dotted line and not going too far into the weeds. So therefore, if we observe in the board meeting that maybe, we're going into the weeds, is that what that means, best practice? So I think it's going back and truly defining what we mean and what we're looking for as we do this self-reflection.
But even before we do the self-reflection, because you bring a key point. Maybe we need to walk through and look at each norm and make sure we understand what is said. Or do we all, to be clear about it, what you just said, and if we don't agree, maybe we need to delete it or come up with something else
Right.
that everybody can adhere to. Because I think we've never taken the time to really talk about it, which is good. We're doing it now, but it's what we did. We've always done it. Because I had someone ask me when I was running, why don't they ever say anything? They just seem to sit there and rubber stamp. Nobody says a word. And the public persona of that is much different. They don't say anything. They just rubber stamp and move on.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so that is probably the decision we want to make now. Do we want to examine each norm first to see if we have like consensus on what it means? Or do we want to get a sense of how we think we're using them and then bring that together? Which do you think would help you better examine them so that they're truly a tool that works for you? Do you think going into these definitions and looking at it more carefully would help you then when you do a self-reflection? Or would the self-reflection help you examine what you want to drill down deeper on?
I think we need to do a self-reflection. At one point when I was teaching, we received a new principal into the building, and we had a lot of issues going on. And my question to him was, what are you going to do about these problems that exist? And his response was, it's not what I am going to do, it's what we are going to do. And ever since then, I have put it within my mind in looking at us as a board. We have to show a sense of unity together, whether we agree or disagree, but to come together as one so that the image that is projected out to the public, to the parents, to the students, the teachers, and the staff, that we are unified. And that's why I think the self-reflection would be best first, for us to look at ourselves and see whether or not we can come together to agree or disagree. And I respect Rhonda Page, and when she mentioned the statement that she enjoyed a good fight. Mm-hmm. I didn't know that about her. That's the way she has been taught how to handle situations. And so now that I know that when she comes together, it's not because she wanted her way, it's because she wanted together for the unity of the board. So that's why I think we need to do a self-reflection.
Okay, other thoughts on which way to go first?
But I wish we would look at the norms to be clear. Because if I'm looking at it one way and you looking at it another way, and maybe I don't feel if I disagree, I'm disrespecting it. I'm not unified. I just don't like that particular norm. And I'm not going to adhere to it if I don't think it's right.
Mm-hmm. Would it be possible during a self-reflection if we maybe just did one meeting and, like Ms. Page, if you just said, I'm not sure I know what this means, or I'm not sure we all think this means the same thing? I mean, is there middle ground there? And I'm not pushing a direction. I'm just trying to.
No, I'm flexible, but we do have to be realistic. We're saying we got these, but does that mean that they're all right? Maybe they've outlived their time to a certain degree. Some things are good, and then some things, a couple of them are questionable. It's just my opinion.
Mm-hmm. No, I think there's probably a very good chance that you will want to make changes in your norms, because my understanding is they've been around a long time. So what we don't want to do is just have one of those events, like maybe some of you.
You break it up just a little bit.
In jobs or something where you something good, and then it's put on the wall and it really has no part of what you do every day, you know. We want to make sure the norms become something that actually influences how you function as a board.
So I wonder, so Marcia, I'm a question. Are you thinking that this conversation would happen like now if we wanted to talk about the norms, or at a future meeting? And the reason I asked that question is, I think to Ms. Page's point and to Ms. Drew's point, I mean, I think we might be looking at it from a different lens for some of the norms, but I wonder if, to what you said, Marcia, if we do the evaluation, right, or the self-assessment, but we're able to comment how we feel about those norms, or maybe I don't agree with this norm, or this one, you know, has outlived its time or whatnot. And then after we've done that assessment, then we can come back and have a conversation like, okay, we're all in agreement on norm number 1, but norm number 2, you know, 5 people think it's outdated or whatever it is, rather than jumping into a full-blown conversation right now. That might give us some time to think about it and to reflect on each norm a little bit, and then have a more informed discussion on it. I do think that we will, you know, there are probably some that we need to revamp, renew, or look at again, or bring in new ones. But maybe if we're able to comment and assess each of them and how we view them, then we can all read, okay, like everyone sees them this way or not. That might help move the conversation further than trying to do it now.
And don't get me wrong, I believe we need to look at the norms, but I'm suggesting let's do self-reflection first and then go to that.
Okay. Other thoughts? So I'm checking to see if people are blinking, so I know whether you're frozen or just don't have another thought right now.
No, I would agree that, because in our self-reflection also can come recommendations of a new one or replacement or better clarification.
So if we shorten the time of self-reflection so that we get into examining them more closely, does that help address your concerns, Ms. Page? If we make maybe just a one meeting I'm sorry.
By now, we all, I might be wrong. I'm quite sure people will let me know. By now, we know everybody has an opinion. They may not want to talk about it at this time, and it's not a problem. I can go with the flow. If we're going to reflect, I'll reflect.
So, but you raise a point that maybe might have been part of what Randy meant. So, Randy, don't let me put words in your mouth if this isn't what you meant. But perhaps having that time to go back and individually put down your thoughts makes it feel safer to express something that you believe others may disagree with if we build in a step. Did I put words in your mouth?
Nope. I think that is helpful, and you know, that we're not going back and forth on it, but you know, I can say what I need to say and feel okay, knowing that others are going to read it at some point, right? But I think that could be helpful for some folks.
Okay. Others that we haven't heard from, are you not sure what you're thinking, or do you need another minute to think?
I agree with Randy.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Dr. Nguyen, did you have any?
Well, I lost connectivity there for a minute.
Okay, I thought you disappeared.
I was in the cloud again. Well, I mean, I already told you what I thought about one of them, so. You know.
So my question is, like, knowing that, because I think it was your comment that kind of has driven us to kind of looking at this either or. Do you think it would be more beneficial to spend a little time, you know, have a meeting where you self-reflect, then come back and drill down and examine and define? Or do you think it, to be more effective, that really need to examine what they mean before there's a self-reflection?
Well, you know, I'm used to not having a lot of meetings dealing with a specific topic, and so, as I say, I expressed my view right there on one, and we've been now on the board. I guess, you know, the newest people, what, Randy, been here a year? I can't, 6 months?
Not even yet.
9 months.
Okay, well, so 9 months.
10 months.
So, I mean,
Yeah.
we know what we think the words mean. So, we're all adults. I think we can tell people right now what and I believe this is a safe environment. I don't fear any of the other individuals, and they don't fear me. You may not like how I say anything, or you may not like what I say, but it's still, we're all adults. And if we give ourselves 10 minutes, say what you got to say, then we move on. But that's just how my environment, meetings I am in, and when you don't stretch out things for 2 or 3 meetings. So that's just one out of 6. So I don't think, I put it like this and I end it. You'll never leave not knowing what I think about it. So.
Okay. I'm not necessarily hearing consensus yet.
I think a suggestion. I'm not sure how much you would want me to participate, but I was wondering, might it be useful to maybe go through each norm, share what the intent of the norm was for clarity, and then have the conversation of how are we doing with it? Might that be helpful?
And, the only problem I see with that, I don't think any of us know what the intent was.
Okay.
Who created these norms? Does anybody have that institutional knowledge?
Okay, and that was the next thing I was going to ask. None of you were on the board when these were created. Is that a true statement? Okay. Okay. What about, and usually I say with consensus, we don't do compromise, but tell me if this would meet everyone's primary needs. What if we had Randy read them one by one, and we do some brief discussion of what we think it means, and then we follow that then with self-reflection at the next meeting, and then if I could get information from you, that would help us figure out if we need to examine these or if we need to scrap everything and start over. I mean, that's a possibility as well. The agenda I have for today, I wanted to be very flexible, so I have entered into this knowing there was no way possible to do everything I had planned for you. But I think it's important that we take these things on. Can you just do a thumbs up or down if that's acceptable to you? Thumbs up if you can, if it's your preference, if you don't care. Okay. Are there any thumbs down?
But there's no thumbs up and thumbs down in the webinar settings.
Okay, that's what's different. Yeah. Okay, so I have to go by if you shake your heads, yes or no. Okay. All right, Randy, would you be willing to, since you have them right there, since you read them at the beginning of every meeting, let's take one at a time, and then we'll proceed?
Sure, absolutely. So board norm number 1, we agree to respect the differences of opinions in making decisions for the district.
So I guess my question is, and I think this is what Dr. Nguyen said earlier, what does respect look like if someone's voicing an opinion that you don't agree with? What does that look like?
Well, to me, that looks like not over speaking another person, nor calling someone out of their names or making assumptions about their intent based on looks.
Okay, so not interrupting, that's the first part that you said, which, as I've interrupted you all 1,000 times, is really challenging on Zoom, but we do our best. Not generalizing, and tell me, Dr. Yeager, if this does not, if I'm not accurately portraying what you said, but not generalizing from what you heard other kinds of meaning, that if they say this, that this would be true in additional categories, and so you attach, you said, name or label to them, or they must fit in a certain category. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay, and I'm sorry, I missed the very last point you said.
Not making assumptions based upon look or stature. There's been accusations of staff members, if they look a certain way, that this is what they mean. And they've had to clarify that they did not mean that, or a look doesn't mean a certain thing. So that just basically means not making assumptions based upon look or demeanor.
Okay. Okay, other thoughts about what respect looks like if you don't agree with the opinion that's been expressed?
For me, it's not what you say, it's how you say it, the tone of what you're saying, whether you agree or disagree with the decision that has been made. Sometimes we just have to remain silent if we don't get things our way. So again, I point out the fact that it shows us in that sense of being unified. And respect is most important whenever you don't get what you want, but be careful how you respond to it. That's what I think we need to focus on.
Okay, so the how, and then you said
it's not what you say,
particular,
how you say it.
The tone.
Right.
Okay. Okay. All right, other comments about what it would look like? Dr. Wynn, it looks like you have a yellow box around you on my screen. Are you talking? No?
No.
Oh, okay. So when the yellow box pops up, I think that means. Right. Okay. Other thoughts about what respect looks like if someone's saying something we don't agree with?
I can disagree with you. And that's something I know I have to work on, but I consider myself to be pretty assertive. I'm going to say what's on my heart and my mind. Now, somebody, again, if you like to have a peaceful tone, I'm not going to curse you out or be just totally crazy, but I'm going to say it assertive, and you may not like that tone, but, you know, there's a difference of being aggressive and assertive, and I guess it depends on who's looking at that, how you perceive it. Because I might say that I'm being assertive, and you might say I'm being aggressive. So, and that's something we all got to work on. I know I need to work on, but I'm going to say what I feel. And I may not agree with you, and I'm working on saying, oh, Miss Marcia, I don't agree with you, but I respect your opinion. And I'm going to say what I need to say.
So using that example, tell me what it
okay, you were
would,
I didn't hear you.
Would sound like if you mean it's a beautiful Friday, the wind's blowing, I've got leaves to pick up. What does it sound like if you disagree with me in an overly aggressive way, as opposed to assertive?
Okay, girl, please wake up. Smell the roses. It's okay. No, I'm in jest, but if I didn't agree, no, it's not.
Okay. Okay. Other thoughts?
I would just think, I think sometimes, oh, sorry, I don't know if someone was speaking. I would just say, you know, not, I think sometimes we can disagree, but I think we shouldn't all take it personally. You know, sometimes I think maybe, and I'm guilty of this, that sometimes I've taken something personally when maybe it wasn't meant as a personal attack or something, or we shouldn't bring in like personal issues or do any personal attacks. So keep it at the conversation at like whatever it is, the issue that we're speaking about, but not make it personal or not take it personally. So, but that goes both ways, right? I mean, it means that we shouldn't make things personal on anybody. But then also when I'm receiving information or feedback or critique or whatever, also trying not to take it personally, because then that heightens my defensiveness. And then it, you know, so that's another piece of it, maybe.
So what does it sound like when it crosses that line, and what's been said is too personal? What can you think of an example that hasn't necessarily happened, but where it feels like the line has been crossed?
I'll give you an example that happened, and this is reference to Dr. Yeager's point. Part of it is we come from different experiences, mm-hmm. and in different environments, we have different levels of conversation. I'll call it levels of conversation. But that likewise, when in the past, I have maybe asked a staff a question, and in my opinion, they play the nut role. And the nut role is, and we're all familiar with what the nut role is, that I just can't possibly understand what the question is. And so after 2 or 3 times, in my opinion, of playing the nut role, my comment was, I see I'm making you uncomfortable. Now, the response of the staff person is, oh, no, I'm not uncomfortable. And so if I'm incorrect, am I correct in referencing Dr. Yeager, that incident?
I think it's one of many, because our staff have expressed a number of times that they're fearful of coming to the board and speaking in front of the board. So that's one of many times that assumptions are made or generalizations are made toward members who, of course, would never say to a board member that they are offended, even if they are, because of their fear of how they would be perceived in the future.
Okay, I was just giving an example of the body language that the staff person was exhibiting, and I made the comment, I see I'm making you uncomfortable. And so, again, for me, it was not being disrespectful, because I'm responding to their response. And so it's difficult perhaps for a staff who perhaps has not been in the position of responding to questions or having to respond to questions, and when then, in my opinion, they play this little nut role, that's insulting to me. And my response is then to ask you that way, okay, so you're not comfortable, let's all understand why you're not comfortable. So that is an example, an example in which the I'll say it like this: I felt disrespected by the staff in, quote, playing the nut role, which then became cyclical. That I then said to them, okay, you're uncomfortable, and that's not working from the position of a governing body. So that's a clear example.
So I have to confess, I'm unfamiliar with that term nut roll. This is the first time I've heard it.
You're not familiar with that term?
No.
Okay. When you ask someone who is responsible for a job a question that is not a trick question, what does the organization do in XYZ? And either for whatever reason they choose not to answer, so they stutter around the edges or they act like they don't understand the words you're asking them. Nut roll.
Although they really truly may not understand, just like you had no understanding, and so that it leads to misinterpretation of one would assume that a person was doing a nut roll when in actuality they weren't to everyone else, but maybe just that person's reflection. So I'm sure you were like, what in the world is nut roll? I'm like, haven't heard that term either in a long time. I hope that it's defined like I think it's defined.
Well, I was trying to use context, so I think I got pretty close. So my question is this during a board report, or like, what's the environment in which somebody's being asked a question that they don't answer?
Yeah, ask for clarification of a item or a report.
Okay, so like in a formal prepared report, something
Correct.
That's prepared in advance.
Correct.
Okay. Other comments related to that?
I will say to this too, it's always important to respect the difference in opinion. I think sometimes if a matter has been settled, sometimes it's continually brought up or thrown in someone's face if a mistake is made. So if there is a difference of opinion, not to continually bring it up after a matter is settled as a point to disrespect them or to bring discredit to them. So I think, not continually bringing up a point that's already a moot point. Then lastly, accusing tactics. That would be if I don't agree or say something, then sometimes it's been accused of board members of having backwards meetings, or just because simply they don't agree, then there's accusing statements being made to either board members or to non-board members, our staff, anyone, of possibly having secret meetings, which is not occurring, or, I think that's a really big point that shows in the public's eye that things are going on to discredit the board or to not bring value. And our board president, Randy, has done a great job of trying to reroute when situations or accusations are brought up against other board members in those situations. But when we say respect, I think it's very important that we do not start with accusation or tactics or things of that nature of discrediting of other board members or staff.
Can I say something? Because I'm kind of off. The norm was we agree to respect the difference of opinions when making a decision. Now, look at how we get all this other stuff. So that just shows right there there's a problem. Because I took it as if we're making a decision, we're talking about it, and then you took it a little further. So I didn't take that one statement to mean all what you just said, the latter part.
I was saying respecting differences of opinion is also inclusive in how, when we respond. So like, for instance, at the last board meeting, when there was a difference in opinion, then the next or following thoughts, when Randy asked were there any additional thoughts on a difference on what we were deciding on, the method or what happened was those who had voted were then accused of having a secret meeting. That's what I'm saying. Respect difference of opinion, that it didn't need to be any accusation after those points were made. It didn't need to say, oh, well, did you guys do this or that to come to this conclusion? That's what I mean by respecting difference of opinions.
So I think if we go back to like what Ms. Drew has said, she's talked about unity of the board, and then and with what Ms. Page has said, so there's a responsibility for each board member to make sure when talking about a topic that your opinion is expressed. Like as representatives, that's your responsibility. And then, you know, as Maxine has pointed out, then once that vote has been taken, if you fulfilled your responsibility of sharing your opinion, once that vote has been taken, you know, when we look at best practices of effective boards, then we don't follow up with negative comments related to that because the decision has been made. Equally, though, if you fail to express your opinion before the vote has been taken, you've also not used best practices if you keep that inside and hope that people will just somehow know you disagree with that. But that board unity is once, you know, even if it's 4-3, the board has spoken, and unless it's the kind of issue that's appropriate to return to again, then you go on. Thoughts related to that? I mean, does that?
It makes sense to me.
So I'm also trying to narrow it just a little bit because I hear some other topics that I think we need to return to in the future. But on this one, I'm wondering if it's easier to make sure we're just talking about how we talk to each other right now. Because as Ms. Page was saying, then it does get kind of hard when we make it bigger. Mm-hmm. So some very good points are being made that I think must be discussed and talked about, but maybe separately so that we can really drill down and look at those issues more completely. Mm-hmm. So would that, and maybe I want to hear if someone else right now would want to take a stab at summarizing what you think we've heard from each other in terms of respecting differences of opinion, what that would look like.
I think that we need to, like many of us have said, we all come from different life experiences, and we all need to feel free to express our opinions without other board members saying, well, what gives you the right to have that opinion? We shouldn't be judging each other's right to have an opinion. I guess sometimes that has come up where, well, what gives you the right to, you know, what experience do you have that you can say that? That's not that's not our right to say you can't have that because you haven't had experience in that. We all are on the same footing. There's 7 of us. We all have the right to express what our feeling on that vote is. After the vote's taken, then we support the majority opinion. You know, if 4 people vote this, you know, as Dr. Wynn has said before, we all have the right to explain our vote at the time that we vote. We can say why we are voting this way, and so everyone knows why we vote that way. But afterwards, we support the majority of the board's opinion. So, but we do have the right to say why we're voting that way, and we have to respect each other's opinion.
Does that summarize for most of you?
Agree to disagree and move forward. That's it. And continue with that sense of unity.
Okay. What if in you know, trying to adapt to say your names one at a time and Wait, can you hear me?
No, you were breaking up.
Okay, I'm sorry. Okay.
You could
Can you
reset.
hear me now? I
Yes.
sent my husband a text just a minute ago and said, make sure all other internet is off in the house. So hopefully he got that. Okay, so I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but as elected officials, I also want you to state your opinion. So what I'd like to do is say your names one at a time, and based on the conversation that we've just had, see if you could share, taking what you came into this conversation with, what you've heard your colleagues say, what do you want this to mean now as a norm? Does that make sense what I've said? Okay. Who should I pick on first? Is there someone that who feels ready to try to voice that?
This is Wanda. I heard what was said, and that's something I want to work on. That we can agree to disagree. Everyone has an opinion, and we need to respect each other's opinion, allow that person to say what they need to say, and then we all have a chance to express ourselves. And if we disagree, because the only part I didn't like what I heard, and I respect Stacy's opinion, but when I hear you say the staff, we have the right to ask them questions. They may not like it, and they're all getting paid a salary. And part of their job is, the tough part of that is to ask questions and to answer questions. Just like people in the community ask us questions. Why did you all do this? And I can't run away from it. I have to answer it. Now, they may not like what we ask, and as long as we're not cursing and you're asked a question, he or she should be able to answer that question.
Yeah, and so I do think that is an important issue to revisit, because I've heard 4 of you voice it now. So out of 6, I think
But other than
to
that,
make progress, maybe we take the staff part and address it separately and do just with each other right now. And I'm sorry, Wanda.
No. I was
understand.
just saying, I get it. We got to respect each other, got to listen to each other. Even if I don't agree, I should respect you enough to hear you out and to try to understand why you feel that way, or why did you come to that conclusion. As far as us, I get that. But what I said earlier is the part I don't agree with. But in terms of the members of the board, I get it. We got to respect each other's opinion, agree to disagree, and try not to be disagreeable. It's okay to disagree, but we don't want to be disagreeable.
Okay, thank you. Is there someone that would like to go next to voice it? Janie's ready.
Like what Wanda said, we're 7 members of the board. We're elected to represent our community in making decisions. We need to respect each other's opinion. We need to let everyone have the time to say their opinion, and to do it in a polite and respectful manner. And just like the board norm says, everyone is entitled to their time in respectful manner. I like that norm, and I think we need to constantly work on, making sure that we follow it.
Thank you. Someone else?
And for me, I recognize that we all have strength in certain areas. That's what unify us. And so there are things that others know that I may not know. and I listen carefully so that I can learn. But again, I will say, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. And that will maintain that sense of respect, because again, we have to be unified as the board. And I think if we move in the right direction in that way, we'll get there.
Okay, thank you. Someone else want to go next?
I think one of the things I heard of this week is leadership is about listening, learning, and leaning in. And I started out with that this afternoon, and and I think it applies to all these norms. But with this one in particular that we've been discussing, again, it really is about listening and valuing each other's opinions, and knowing that we come at it from a different viewpoint sometimes, and that's okay. And it's okay to not always agree. But at the end of the day, like I feel we are a team, and we are, in this case for me, we're a family here, we're a team, and we can be united even though we may disagree on things and may not always vote the same way. That's okay. But it's about how we value ourselves and how we value others and how we make others feel as well, in building that unity and building that team approach. And so how do we move forward after, during and after, when we do have a disagreeing vote or decision? It's about what happens next, and how we continue to build unity. So, yeah.
Okay, so key words I pulled from that were valuing each other's opinions, but also valuing ourselves and realizing that we're expressing is important, and that during this, we're talking about that respect during and after. Okay. All right. Let's see.
Well, I'll say, again, I come from the point of view that, one, we are elected officials representing our constituents. Secondly, we are all adults. And third, we have different styles of leadership. But that, yes, respect is given and respect is expected.
Okay. So I think when we talk about respect being expected, that ties into not forgetting to value ourselves and as well as respecting others. So when I repeat these things, jump in if I'm not capturing it correctly, because I'm trying to write this down so to send it back to you. So if I've misunderstood, be sure and let me know. Okay, Dr. Yeager, are you ready?
Yes, so to respect difference of opinions is to allow for others' opinions to be heard, said, and be able to move on after. And respect is both ways. You have to, in order to be respected, you must also give that respect. That's respect of opinion can come from both those we are over, or those who we supervise, as well as those who present to us in the board. Okay.
So I feel like you have emphasized, as we've looked at, as I'm synthesizing what everybody said, the importance of it's both ways in terms of giving and receiving, and expecting and giving. And another key word that I pulled from yours to tie into what everybody said is that we make sure we allow other people to voice their opinion. So that made me think sometimes there are subtle ways in which we communicate, and this is part of the giving, and expecting, but we subtly, through body language, communicate that somebody, okay, I got it, move on. you know, and so maybe that becomes important on that two-way street that we've talked about. You're already tired. And we're just going through this, but this is hard. It is hard to talk about these things, and this is why it takes so long. My plan as we move through this is that I will go back through these notes, as I say, my plan. If this is what you all believe will work, is that I will try to summarize these points related to each norm and then put that into a form so then you can self-reflect based on this discussion that we have today. And then we can return to these, and then you may decide to dump some of these, or you may determine that something else needs to be stated as a norm. For example, I don't think that I heard in the norms, Randy, and I've never actually looked at them in writing, I've just heard them read many times, a norm related to the interaction between board and staff. So if there is not such a norm, that might be something to be visited in the future, because I've heard 4 of you mention that. So it's definitely something that's on people's minds. But I'm wondering right now, Randy, if perhaps we could have you read the second norm and then give everybody a break. But if you go into the break knowing what it is we're going to talk about next, if that might kind of give us a head start, is that agreeable to everybody? And how long of a break do you need? 5? 5 minutes? Okay. So 5 minutes. And so, Randy, you have the microphone.
Great. Thank you. So the second board norm, just want to say hi to Bridget too. Hi, Bridget. The second board norm is to follow best practices in managing the superintendent and the management of the board itself.
Okay. Which ties in, I'm not sure how far we'll get, but we'll talk about superintendent evaluation. That ties in, obviously, to that as well. Okay, so if everybody wants to turn off their cameras, and now by the clock on my computer, come back about 3:27, 3:28. Sound good? All righty.
Thanks.
I digress. Sorry. Should never wake up. So welcome back, everybody. It's hard on a Friday afternoon when people are exhausted. So also remember, we're recording, and so when we go to a break, if you haven't muted, people may hear comments that you're making as you're walking away from the screen. So I say that just to be very cautious, because we have a record of this. So as you're thinking about, best practice, following best practice, and I don't know, Mr. Board President, would you like to read it one more time to bring it back into everybody's mind?
Absolutely. So board norm number 2, to follow best practices in managing the superintendent and the management of the board itself.
Okay. So initial thoughts, this one is probably more empirical and a little less emotional, than a word like respect. But what are some initial thoughts as you think about this as a board norm?
My question is, what are best practices?
Okay.
Clarification on that.
Okay. So this one, drilling down, goes pretty deep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Other thoughts?
I would say the best practices is like this training, being able to clearly understand what it means to communicate. So if we have the policy of, doing our board meetings or board planning meetings to respect the time of that, to if we have questions or concern when we are supposed to be managing the superintendent, to follow our board protocol that we created in our board handbook. For instance, to always notify Randy, for instance, when we're communicating with the superintendent, as well as if there's a concern, to be able, in our board policy handbook, it said we will take all the concerns to the superintendent for us to ensure that we're again copying board president and superintendent. And when we say management of the board itself, I really think that we need to talk more about how we should manage ourselves. And that goes along with, you know, we do have the board agenda planning meeting and things of that nature, but when we get a little bit off task, and maybe that's our next one, sorry, I'll save that for next one. But managing the board itself, just ensuring that we are having our annual self-reflections, having the trainings that we've set with you all, going to conferences so that we do know what it means to manage or get clarification that we may not have. And that also includes following best practices, attending some of those KASB trainings so that we can know, a little plug for KASB, yeah, what the policies and the best practices and policies are, so that we are aware of what we're doing.
Okay, thank you. Other thoughts? Okay, so I'm just, in case you're thinking, or unless I was too quick before somebody could unmute, but, you know, as I think the most common best practices that we would think of in this category, those would be superintendent evaluation, which we may or may not have time to get to this afternoon, the development of the board agenda, and the process for a defined process for like the number of meetings before a board, before a new policy is adopted, like how many meetings should there be in that course of adopting the board policy. So those are the probably most significant best practices that we're usually, you know, working with boards to help them. Other ones would be making sure that, you know, you're in compliance with open meetings, you know, open records, some of those kinds of things that we tend to remember when maybe we've gotten close to making a mistake, then all of a sudden we remember those kinds of things. So other thoughts that have occurred to anyone? Okay. And this particular one was related to managing the superintendent and each other. Okay. So keeping that narrow area. Is there anything that within this norm that you have a concern about people misunderstanding, or somebody either misunderstands it or there's a difference of opinion on what something means with this one? Okay, it definitely is more objective than the one we just talked about. So do you think maybe with a self-reflection, if I put some examples of those best practices that would assist in self-reflection of that? Okay, so unless someone disagrees, I think we're ready to move on. Anybody? Wow, what a difference between those two. Okay. Shall we hear?
Before you move on, let me add that one would think best practice would also be following state statutes. when it comes to governing boards and school boards and Board of Education. I mean,
And
they're
so
same thing.
I do think some of those examples that I would want to include, which you would be especially familiar with from the legislature, are some of those open meetings and open records. And are there any others in particular that you're thinking would be good to highlight?
Not off the top of my head. That's kind of like a guidebook. You know, you follow that road, you sure don't break any laws.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. The next one then.
Okay, board norm number 3, to stay on task when conducting business for the district, including while at board meetings.
Okay, so it sounds like maybe we want to talk about that in 2 parts. The part while you're actually at a board meeting and the part that's not at board meetings, because it definitely separates it in the norm. So what are some examples? And I know one that jumps to my head immediately, but I want to wait and see if you guys say it. For when you're not in a board meeting that shows you're on task and focused.
Could you explain that? When are we together? We're not in a board meeting.
So not necessarily together, but fulfilling and focused on your responsibilities as a board meeting. So if we break that into break that into 2 parts. What does that look like when you're in a board meeting to be on task? And then so I guess.
Well,
I'm sorry, you're breaking up. I don't
syntax, not to be critical of whomever wrote that, because, Norm's usually a great project. But the syntax of that is a little awkward. It's more like, what are your responsibilities outside of a board member? I can't talk. Outside of a board meeting that would be an expectation.
Would that be
or would be a norm?
Like making sure that you read the information, you're well versed, so when you come in and you talk about whatever the topic is, at least you know what the issues are and the information that's been presented. Or you may have done a little research on your own to add to it. I look at it like that, in terms of us being on task.
So that was the first thing that jumped to the front of my brain, is being well prepared.
Yeah.
When you show up at a board meeting, you're not like quickly skimming the information as you're walking in, that you are well prepared. So yeah, I was on the same page as you. Oh, pardon the pun.
Okay.
Other thoughts?
I think this would include also when we get questions or inquiries from the community about staying on task and aligning ourselves with the protocol or the procedures. So for example, if we have a concern or a question when we're talking to a community member, be able to route them and redirect them to the protocol of, have you spoken with your principal? Have you spoken with your go back and have them rerouted and knowing the chain of command. Also following through if need be to again copy the board president and the superintendent to be able to ensure that they're aware of the issue.
Okay. And that is something that I did build into what I wanted to review again today, is what that chain of command looks like. Thinking that through. And sometimes it's unclear what the chain of command might be, in a unusual topic. And so kind of having a protocol for if you're not sure, and then once again, making sure that as a board, you've identified who will be copied. So typically the superintendent and the board president. In some boards, it's the superintendent, the board president, and the vice president. But those are decisions that have been made and then people follow those protocols. Okay, so I have well prepared the communication and chain of command. Okay, other things outside of the board meeting.
I have a question. If there's something that, let's say, that I want to know, do I always have to make sure that I send it to the board president, the superintendent, so that it can be discussed at the meeting? Because some things, it seems to me that you can just ask the question and get it, say, from the superintendent and have your answer. And it seems like that's why our time limit at the meetings are so extensive. And I'm not saying that at times we shouldn't have those long meetings, but it seems as though some of the questions don't necessarily need to be answered at the board meetings. I'm just curious, is there a protocol that we can do that?
Yeah, and that is something that we talk to a lot of boards about. So, oops, am I frozen? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you. You were frozen, but now
Okay,
you're not.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So the first thing I want to say is something we don't generally want to hear, but, you know, democracy is not efficient, you know, and so on the one hand, we go through steps that seem sometimes unnecessary. On the other hand, it's important as board members that you remember your board meetings are business meetings in which the public is allowed to attend and listen to, and you build in ways to hear from them. But, you know, it is a business meeting with certain efficiencies built in. So those are kind of, it sounds like two opposing points. The reason that we really discourage, even when it seems minimal, just going as an individual board member and getting a piece of information is that it's really never okay for one board member to have information that the whole board does not have. And so as board members, you kind of have a responsibility, if you think of a question, for them to be able to get the benefit or the value of the response that you get. So but then I'll go back to the business meeting and the efficiency of the business meeting. It does not have to happen in a board meeting. So that's why it's important to make sure the superintendent is copied, because the superintendent may send out information to all board members, but you as board members, you know, can't be sending information out because then you start to violate public meetings. So anything that goes to all board members becomes public information. And that way then that the superintendent and the board president have control of that, so that that becomes public information, which obviously then the board clerk maintains. So it feels kind of unnecessary when they're minor questions. The problem is when we start to, well, this one's just little, then that line gets broken, you know, and then it's a bigger issue the next time and maybe a little bigger issue the next time. And so kind of just remembering that idea that one board member should never hold a piece of information that the whole board does not have. That kind of helps us stay in that lane.
So if one of us has a question that
other thoughts about this?
So if one of us asks a question of the superintendent, it's good practice that when the superintendent responds, that they send the response to all the board members. Is that correct?
Right. That's the way, or could initiate a new email, because it's better not to have rolling
chain.
communication to have
Right.
a chain. So for the superintendent to take that question and say, and she doesn't even have to identify who asked. A board member has asked, and this is our response. So sometimes the question may be significant to the discussion of a policy under review, then that probably needs to be talked about in a board meeting. But if it's more incidental or more like background knowledge that may be informative down the road, then that can just be a communication to the board, that just takes care of things, and it's a way to be a bit more efficient sometimes with some of those smaller things.
Okay.
Okay. So other thoughts for outside of the board meeting then? Does that kind of take care of the on task kind of things? Okay, so what does it look like to be on task during a board meeting?
I know with other boards, we set a specific time to discuss an issue and move on. I think, we do meet later, sometimes after 11 o'clock p.m., because sometimes there's a number of off-task discussions or off-cancer things that did not relate to the topic. So I think we could be more efficient in this area of staying on task when conducting business. Like I said, with other board meetings, it's really very structured to where we will talk about this issue for 30 minutes. There will be time for question and discussion, and then voting. It's very succinct, in line. So therefore, when we say stay on task, that means talk about the issue, be able to make a decision, or, as you mentioned before, as a board, decide, okay, we will look at the issue, make a decision the next meeting in order to decide on that issue so that we can have additional information or questions. And as I talk about this, another point that we tried to incorporate last year is to ensure that if there are questions relating to a board item discussion, then they will need to be submitted prior to board meetings. So therefore, when you get to the board meeting, it shouldn't be new questions popping up over everywhere. It should simply be the responses that were given, already sent out to the board. Therefore, they don't need to be re-asked during a board meeting. It should just be, presented and made a decision. I think sometimes we have questions that we've asked and all the board member has the answer, but then they're re-asked again, which prolongs the discussion. So,
yeah, and another benefit to really trying to structure the questions being submitted prior are you get better answers, as opposed to when someone's trying to respond off the top of their head. So if the question can be asked in advance with time for the staff to put together a response, you're probably going to actually get more information than you will on the spot in most cases.
And Marcia, I have a
Yes.
problem. Part of our problem is the agenda. You can't put all this stuff on an agenda. And it's not all of us, just the conversation going off every now and then. You can't put all these things on and think when you get to meaty issues, you only want to say 15 minutes. Now, we're talking about whether we're going to extend the school semester. Maybe we want to stop November 9th, bring everybody in, or we're going to keep it for the semester. That's not a 30-minute. This is a critical issue.
Right.
And you can't put that on there and put 25 other things, and you wonder why we're here at 12 at night. The agendas are crazy. They don't make sense sometimes. We put too much on, and you can't do it all. And then you wonder why we don't, or when we have issues like finances, some things you can't shorten up. And why would you put all this other stuff? And we're going to talk about the budget. the budget to me is a separate issue, and everybody needs to be awake and not talk about it at 11 or 12 o'clock.
Right.
Now, it's not all of us just going off tangent. The agenda is an issue that we got to figure out a way to master it. Where when not, some of the stuff we do, it doesn't make sense. We do it to our own selves.
So I do think it is really worth revisiting the agenda building process. And that's not just who is involved, but like the structure of the calendar. And so the things that you anticipate and you know when they're going to occur. But last year and this year have been the perfect examples of when you can't begin to predict, some of the items you're going to have on an agenda. Now, districts that do put those time allotments, what happens when they come to an issue like you were just describing, if inadequate time has been put on the agenda item, the board votes to extend the time for that item. It kind of depends what it is. Does it have to be decided tonight? Or can it go to a new board meeting? Or do we need a special board meeting? I mean, this pandemic has created items that we never could have predicted. But the structuring of time causes the agenda setting process to think through that a little bit. How much time do we really think that we need for this item? The other thing to example, and these are things I don't know in your case, I'm just talking about generally things that we see with boards. Do you have the appropriate things in your consent agenda? Are there things that maybe you're taking time during the regular meeting that really could go into a consent agenda? Sometimes people are uncomfortable with that because they think it's not as open to the public. But Wanda just raised a good point. It's also not as open to the public if you're discussing important issues at 11:30 p.m. So you really kind of have to weigh that. And using the length of a board meeting is indicative of a need to go back and revisit your process. If your meetings consistently run long, that means we really do need to kind of look at the agenda building process and then the elements within. And so some of those do include how we clarify information in reports. What's the timeline that we give from the point of like policy conception to adoption, with maybe some policies don't need don't need to be hurried, but sometimes, as you just talked about, something will come up, there's no way we could have predicted this, and we need to give it time now. So you have to look at those. But I think it might be good to really sit down and look at the way those meetings are put together.
And then sometimes we violate our own policies where a new contract is not to be set on the consent agenda. So then when it's pulled off or set aside because it is a brand new contract, then there's concern that, and let's say there is concern and impatience, because it's like, well, this is just a small little $49,000, $50,000 contract. No, the policy that the board has already adopted says new contracts are not on the consent agenda. Renewed ones, correct. And then there's still a threshold for the value.
Okay, so if that's happening consistently, then the board might want to look at that policy and say, do we have discomfort with the way the policy is currently written? Or do we just need to make sure that all members are more familiarized with our existing policy? If that's like something that comes up consistently over time. Okay, these are good points, not to be resolved today, but to really look at where the work is that needs to be done. Other thoughts related to during the board meeting? Okay, so nobody's sitting on the phone listening to their TV show that they missed during the meeting or anything like that, or buying clothes. What kind of board meeting was that where the camera picked up the woman buying clothes? Yay, I'm so glad that's not one of them.
I think that was in Louisiana, wasn't it?
I think it was.
Yeah.
It's coming back to, it's coming back to me. And the topic they were talking about when she was doing it was, okay. I digress again. Gee, I'm making the meeting too long. So outside of the meeting, that was pretty concise and tight. You know, being well prepared as individuals, making sure that you've communicated appropriately and that you follow the chain of command. During, that's where it looks like we want to identify what we're doing, our practices and our policies, to see if there are some things we can do to clean that up. So would there be value, after looking at those practices, to put time allotments and
Marcia, you're frozen. You have to repeat the statement.
It's kind of a self-reflection board, because as you're doing a thing, this is how much time it'll take, and it's never right. She is really having a sense of how much time we need for each item, okay? Or if it's just occasionally that the time allotment is not appropriate, then that's a different piece of information. So that can be a practice that can be helpful to you, you know, as you're trying to get to clean up the way your meetings run. So, I mean, I'm not saying you should do it, but it might be worth a discussion.
Could you say that first part again? You were breaking up, Marcia, that first part.
So if you put time allotments down, but you find that the agenda items never match the time predicted, that gives you information to help you get better at the way you develop your board agenda, if they're never right. But if they're only occasionally off, that means you've probably got a pretty good system, because it's normal that there are going to be some agenda items that you can't predict are going to take more time than anticipated.
From your experience on working with boards and being on, I assume you've been on a board.
I have not been on a school board. I've been on Dr. Miguel's side of the board.
Okay. When you, like I said, how many items do most normally have?
There is such variation in the way people group and structure things that becomes kind of a hard question to answer. But you know, maybe I should give you a variety of examples to look at.
Okay.
Would that be help?
Yeah, I think it would help, because like I said, we have so much. You're only meeting twice a month, and you know, it gets old, and we understand we have a responsibility, but there has to be a better way. If we start at 5, 8 at the latest, to me, you ought to be, unless it's something really controversial, we ought to be able to get in and get out.
Yeah, and there are large districts that are able to do that. So,
and Marcia, would you be
but not every year. I'm sorry.
Marsha, would you be able to look at our agenda too to give us feedback on what you may see?
Yeah, and I won't just use my experience. I'll have the team. I mean, that's, we try as a team to combine all of our various experience. So, yeah, why that's a great idea. I hadn't thought of that. If I'll have maybe when Leslie gets back, she could email me some past agendas, and then I could pull together also some other examples, but I'll get some feedback from the team on what they see.
I'll make notes for her for that. Got it. I'll
Okay.
get that to her. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Do you feel like with this norm that you have an understanding for proceeding? Then, I mean, realizing we have a lot more to do, but just for now?
Yeah.
Okay, I see head shaking. All right, our next norm.
I have a feeling this will be a fun one. To never surprise the superintendent or each other when conducting official business of the district.
Okay. So now we have been on the edges of this so far in our conversation. So I do think it's important to keep the parameters on this with the superintendent and her role, because I think we need some more focused discussion at a later time to talk about the staff role, because there are other issues attached to that. So what does it look like if you are not surprising the superintendent at a board meeting, or the inverse of that? What does surprising the superintendent look like?
I would say not surprising the superintendent, meaning any questions or concerns that will be discussed at the board meeting, the superintendent will be fully aware. So what does this mean? This means that if I get a phone call today, and the board meeting is today, about technology issues, I will not bring it up at the board meeting, but I will send that information to Randy and the superintendent so that they will have full knowledge to be able to do the research, understand, and give a full answer to the board after the fact. And so that's what I feel it means. There should be no information presented at the board that previously is not known to the superintendent. So that means that when Alicia's sitting in the meeting, it shouldn't be like, oh my goodness, let me write that issue down. I've never heard of it. No, that then, in my opinion, oh, something's come up between whatever she does not know about it. I will not surprise her nor the rest of the board. I will send an email to her board president. Neither of them will be shocked at any information that is brought up during the meeting.
Okay, other thoughts?
I never liked that particular rule, because I have sat in there and I've been surprised. Just recently, we had a pre-planning meeting, and what we talked about was not presented the way it was presented at the pre-planning meeting. So it works both ways. And I always thought, and I'm looking at the past, and then we have to relate the past, the present, the future. It all goes together. That I don't like that. I mean, you should be able to bring up whatever, and you deal with it. And it's not like I'm trying to catch you. Maybe I didn't think of the question at that time. And if it comes up, for example, and they weren't nasty, but I was listening to, I can't think of the gentleman's name. And when the new buildings, I said, hey, are we putting in these blow dry hand blowers to dry your hands? That's not a good environmental thing. And I'm not trying to dog them out, but it just dawned on me, and I saw a report, and they were saying that they should use paper towels. You shouldn't be using these hands because they blow, all kind of germs and what have you. But again, it's not to throw them off, but it's just, I didn't think of it at that time. It wasn't until I saw it and he was saying, these are the restrooms. And I said, oh, wow, those are those blowers. I said, hey, did you guys ever think about not putting those in lieu of what's going on? So not trying to, I got you. It just happened at that time. And again, I go back to another question I was asked when we were running. They just said it just seems too prepackaged. You know, no one asked a question. Or maybe I'm crazy. It just didn't seem natural.
Okay. You know, I might interject that one of the things we're hearing from boards, though, that would be the rose of the pandemic is that because meetings are recorded in this way or live streamed, that this is anecdotal. I don't have data on this, but we're hearing from boards that they're hearing from their communities that they've never felt more informed about the work of the board and have a better understanding of what happens behind the scenes before that business meeting, because it's easier for them to access this stuff. So I just interject that because just like you, when you said that, it triggered this idea of, I wonder if people would still have that sense that things are just a rubber stamp when they have more access to that information to, you know, go get it on their own. So just a thought related to that. Other things in terms of surprising the superintendent.
I've already expressed my view on it, but let me reverse that. It's difficult when the community says, ask a board member a question and we have to see it on television. Or I'm reading about what the district did on Twitter. And that's that surprise aspect that I was referencing, that, really, you're a board member, you don't know, and the first time you hear of the situation, the evening news or social media.
Okay.
And that is true. I've ran across that several times. I've seen something announced on Twitter
In terms of getting communication out to the board.
Before.
I'm sorry.
I've heard about it from the superintendent or the board, or the board's heard about it. And I won't bring up specifics. I'm just saying that's a surprise. And I know there's a lot of stuff that goes out from our communications department that we don't know about, but somehow we've got to improve that communication, where if it's going to go out to social media, somehow it needs to come out to the board at the same time so that we know about it, because not all of us are social media gurus where we're clued into everything. And that goes with hand in hand at the board meeting. So if we've got to communicate, and Dr. Miguel is working very hard on that. And she's only been in this position for a little while, so we've got a learning curve on that. But, and like Wanda said, sometimes at those meetings, it's not like we're trying to surprise people with questions. It's sometimes you submit questions by noon on Monday, but sometimes the answers to your questions bring more questions. And that happens at the meeting, and it's not really you're trying to surprise someone, you just have another question. So you have to balance that and realize that maybe they don't have that answer to your question because you just had the question. You have to be patient and realize that they may come back with your answer later. But that shouldn't keep you from asking the question.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Well, and some of that depends on what your practice is in terms of how many meetings before, a vote is taken. Because if it is a vote that doesn't that you're not running into a timeline because it's unpredictable, and you build in, introduced one meeting, so that questions can arise, questions answered second meeting, so that the questions triggered by the questions arise. So then those are submitted. Information is sent out to the board prior, but darn it. I wonder if my internet is just saying we're tired of all these meetings. It was working perfectly. Okay, I'm not sure what you missed, but if you have a practice where, like, topic introduced, questions answered at second meeting, submitted, answered, and then if those answers, like you're saying, trigger additional questions, which also kind of makes me think about what Wanda was saying with the dryers. It's then when they start making that report, you think, well, what about this? Then those are submitted in time to have those written answers that become part of the next board package for that meeting when the actual vote is taken. Now, sometimes, especially, these are harder to talk about right now because we've had so many unpredictable things come up that you don't have that luxury of time. But if you can do that for everything that isn't so urgent, it certainly tightens up your agenda so that it's not so cumbersome when the unexpected arises.
And let me circle back to, just for 2 seconds, the aspect of respect, so that if for some reason the president had not been informed, in my opinion, it's not necessary to go through this whole discourse of trying to chastise somebody for, you didn't ask, you didn't tell the president, did she know? It's like 2-minute conversation, like, okay, now let's move on. So we're going through this process, and in our back of our minds, we know examples, but also we all recognize this is a public meeting. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows what has happened before. So fine, here we are. But that again, two-way communication is sometimes happening, sometimes it's not.
So one of the things I think we should do, and this isn't really part of a self-reflection on this, but I am wondering if there wouldn't be some value in just sending a survey out to all of you to say, these are the things that I would like to get information on, and this is how I would like to get it. So we could kind of see where you all are. Like, maybe you don't overlap very much. Maybe you all have different opinions, or maybe it overlaps tightly, then it would be really easy to fix that. But, we all kind of have personal preferences on how we want to receive our communication, and what we're interested in. And it's kind of like when we talk about people's personalities. There are people that they want to know, I want to know exactly how it works before I'm going to believe it. And some people are just give me the big picture, the final piece. So I almost wonder on this one if maybe that information might not be more helpful before we try to self-reflect, because you may be in 7 different places.
I think that complicates things. This is all public information. And right. It seems like in my opinion, if we're talking about communication, or what is the topic again with the superintendent, it just kind of muddies the water if I'm going to send you an email or you a hard copy.
Yeah, no, I am not suggesting that. No, what I'm just saying is an activity that we sometimes do with boards is get that information, and then and then say, based on what we have and how most people prefer to get it, this is how we're going to do it. So some people maybe have their absolute desires totally matched, and some people may have to accept that it's not their preferred way of communicating, but that people would agree this is how we're going to do it to best meet the needs of our board members. So you would all agree that this is how we're going to do it, but you have data as opposed to just kind of trying to figure out what we think everybody wants.
In terms of this particular norm, do most districts have this? Is it just traditionally, just from what I saw, we just kept it going, and I'm glad we're having the discussion, but is this something that others have?
So
or is it worded?
Where I see this typically is actually not in the norms, but in just best practices. So not necessarily in the board meeting norms, but as they do their yearly self-evaluation and they look at what best practice is, this is absolutely something that people reflect on, and look at what what the outcomes are, if this is happening. So actually, this is probably a perfect place to share this example as you're going to be looking for a new superintendent. And so the most qualified applicants out there will investigate and talk to people and find out as much as they can about the people that are going to be their boss, not as individuals, but how they function as a unit. And so probably the most highly qualified applicants, if there's a sense from people who watch meetings that it looks like the superintendent is getting surprised, that's going to look over here where it looks like they adhere more to the best practice, of communicating differently. That's just one example. The other one that I go back to is you get better information back when it's not a surprise. So in terms of meeting your needs for information, when it's given to the superintendent so that they know that it's coming, they're going to be able to get you better information than if all of a sudden they're responding. But the reason I think that we want to go back and do the survey is, but our board members' needs for communication being met, because these can feed the other one. So if you feel like you're not getting the information you need in the manner that you want it, you may have more questions come up that you don't know about. So poor Alicia's in this position where she's just stepped into what's existing and following it. So I don't think we can use anything that's happening right now. And that's why I think if we really look at what works best for you, it's designing it in a way that works up front instead of just continuing with what's in place. That was probably determined by people who are no longer on the Board of Education. Did I freeze again?
Yeah.
Did I freeze again?
Yeah.
Marsha, it may
Did
not.
you hear enough to get the gist?
What?
Oh, shoot.
Marsha, you may want to try turning the video off. Sometimes that helps if you have bad connection.
Okay.
So
Okay, well, that's a much better picture of me anyway. That's, that's 5 or 6 years old. I'm just going to do that one. Did you get the gist of what I said, or do I need to repeat it? Okay. So that's why I almost think take this one out for now, because I do think we need more information, especially since we know these norms were written before you guys were on the board.
So are you saying do not take it out? I didn't hear.
I'm saying, I mean, you can still read it as a norm because that's your policy and your practice, but before we do the self-reflection on it, I think we need more information on, because this is so much two-way. I mean, you know, you're going to inadvertently surprise somebody if your communication needs haven't been met. You know, if you haven't gotten the information.
I think a survey would be good for us to know how each other wants to be communicated.
Yeah, and that's the other reason why we sometimes do this with boards, because it helps you know more about each other in terms of your communication styles. So is there kind of some consensus to kind of set this one aside for now? Okay. Mr. President, where are we in our norms?
So we are on number, if we're done with that one, going on to number 5. We've got 2 more, 5 and 6. So
okay.
Number 5, are we ready for the next one?
Yes.
Okay. So the next one is, the board, we agree to read these norms at the beginning of each board meeting and at board workshops as a reminder of how to conduct our meeting.
Okay, thoughts about that?
I really like that because it helps us to set the grounding for what the meeting should be, especially once we're able to get them all together, that we're continually reminded of what they are.
Okay. Any other differing thoughts? Okay, so was that an easy one?
Yeah.
Okay, then the last one.
All right, last one. To continually self-check to determine if we are following our norms when conducting district business.
Okay, so essentially what we've been talking about this whole time is formalizing that self-check a little bit, you know, in the short term to see if the norms fit. Is there any differing opinion on this? So we're done?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I just think this is an individualized process that we have to do. And nobody else really don't need to know because we're not verbalizing. But if one of the things, and this is just me, that I always try to do with myself is I look at myself on the negative side to see if there is something that I'm not doing right and not just look at the positive. And so that will help me to be better at what I'm trying to do. So this is one I think that we always do from within.
I also think that when you're reading these norms every time and you read this, you are modeling for your staff good practice. You know, as working with teachers, one of the things that we say is at the end of every day, stop and reflect on, you know, what do I wish I would have done differently today? What went really well? And so I think it models professionalism by reading that out loud. Okay. Other thoughts before? So I'm going to use these notes, send you a self-reflection. I'm also going to create a little bitty survey on communication. And then I'm going to receive some of your board agendas. And as a team, we're going to kind of look at those, and I'm going to get you some examples of board agendas.
Hey, Marcia, I have a question. And it's kind of an overarching question regarding our board norms. So, and it might fall in kind of the evaluation process that you're talking about. So when we read these and you know, we're to follow these board norms at every meeting or whatever we end up coming to consensus on being our board norms, how do we, if we feel like, let's say for instance, you know, I'll pick on Stacy. If Stacy thought that I was being disrespectful and not following 5 of the 6 norms or whatever it is, right? How should we go about as an individual to give feedback to either that person or to the board as a whole to say, hey guys, like, I don't think we're necessarily adhering to our norms the way they're supposed to be. Or I felt that, Randy, you were disrespectful to me when you pointed X, Y, and Z out. So I'm just curious, what have you seen works in terms of how we evaluate the effectiveness of our norms and whether we're adhering to them or not? And how do we communicate that with each other, individually and or as a whole?
So you asked the hardest question of the day. School boards are self-policing, so it is your responsibility, as a board, if when someone's not adhering, to communicate that. You are also elected, which means all of that conversation must happen in public. So those are the things that make it a little more difficult. Typically, when awareness has been raised to these issues, most boards find that members pretty much fall in line, and only rarely does someone gently, remind somebody of a norm. Sometimes there will be a board member, it seems like it's usually only 1, sometimes 2, that most frequently does not adhere. And the board, board members make it a point to remind that person, and sometimes they just move on. I mean, I'm just being really honest here. You really just have to find what's going to work for you to still be efficient and effective. Because if this becomes something where a lot of time is spent at every meeting reminding people, then the norms aren't working. So it's that self-policing, and that we as board members take on this responsibility to follow the norms that are adopted. And so that's why reviewing this and, and agreeing on what they're going to be, hopefully will help people feel more comfortable that you have norms in place that can work. So there isn't a great answer to that question, and and like we just spent a lot of time, and that's really what makes them work, is the processing of it. It's inefficient, it's messy, it's not fun, but that's kind of how you get there, because there's not a person on the board that's on the board without great care about the district they're in, because why else would you volunteer yourself for all this pain and misery for no pay? So that's what really ultimately makes it work, because everybody wants to be part of an effective functioning board to do the best for your community. So sorry, it's not like black and white and written on a page. Any other thoughts or questions before we move on? Okay, so we're down to, you're probably just worn out, so I'm not going to do, I'm adapting as we go. So I want to revisit this. This is big, big, big. Janie, I'm just curious, how many times have you seen this?
Many, many times.
Okay. Because this is so important. All of you have seen it, because I showed it to you last time we did this. But, this is the fire tower. Having just come home from California with all the wildfires, I'm looking at this a little differently. As board members, when you're at the top of the watchtower here, you can see the valley, everything below, you can see what is going on. When you come down these steps and get into the weeds, all you can see is what is right around you. And your role as board members is to function with that. And that's why the most important job you have as board members is the hiring of a superintendent, because you're hiring a professional that manages what happens down there in the weeds. Did I just freeze again?
No.
Can you hear
No,
me?
we can hear you. Yeah.
Okay. So sorry, I don't know. It seems to be getting worse. So if you didn't hear me, that's why hiring your superintendent is so very important, because you're going to hire someone that you trust to take care of what's down there. So once again, your role is establishing the vision, and we're going to talk more about that, the adoption of policy. Then the superintendent develops plans to implement the policy that you've adopted, implements those plans, monitors progress, and then gives that information from progress monitoring to you to evaluate the results to see if the vision was realized. So this is how we summarize this. As a board, you are looking at the why, and then you determine what you want to happen. It's the superintendent that looks at how to achieve the what that you've identified, and then to be able to explain why they think that is the way to achieve what it is that you want to happen. And so I'm going to skip these for now. Let me bring this up quickly in terms of just a quick reminder of your primary responsibilities as board members are the policies, the handbooks, those superintendent directives, evaluating the superintendent, the goal setting process, and then that negotiated agreement. Do you negotiate with any other unions in your district besides teachers?
No.
Okay. All right. That makes it a little easier on your side. And then, the finance, the budgeting, the allocation of resources. So that's just a quick reminder. Because we have time here, hang on, because these things, part of this is review and going a little deeper into stuff we talked about last time. Once again, processing. Okay, I want to share this little piece here because I've mentioned it a couple of times. So as board members, it can be really hard, especially now with social media, to not be sure if we are really hearing the voices in our community, because sometimes it can seem louder than it may be in reality because of the way it's reflected in social media. I want to play just real quickly here a little 2-minute piece that this is Brian Jordan's voice just talking about voice here.
Welcome to KASP Board Leadership Lessons, where we share tips and ideas to create a great board culture. In this session, we'll talk about balancing the voices that you hear from as a board member when making difficult decisions. As you know, there's great responsibility with being a board member, and there can be a lot of pressure to go one direction or another when facing a difficult decision. We hear frequently from board members that they are bombarded with voices from a loud minority, and these are amplified through social media, email, and showing up at the board meeting. How do we hear from the silent majority is often a question that we get from board members. Some tips or things to consider to try to hear from a wider swath of your constituency. Think about who you're not hearing from when those local minority individuals are loud and present. Also keep in mind, as a board, you represent all students, not just the people that have the loudest voices. So when deliberating and trying to make a difficult decision, often think about those voices that you did not hear from and how the decision will impact them. Another strategy is to equip yourself with information. We often encourage boards to seek out processes to gather information from a representative group of individuals. This can come in the form of surveys. Different advisory groups such as site councils are often great ways to hear from a wider group of representative individuals in the district. Another strategy is get specific. Oftentimes we will hear people throw out terms like many people or lots of individuals. As a leader, get specific. Ask, when you say many, can you quantify that? Or when you say lots, how many is a lot? What this does is it allows the leaders to quantify the voices they have heard from and then compare that to the overall numbers of voices that they could potentially hear from. In a recent conversation with the communications specialist, she gave the example of if you've received 50 emails on a given topic, but you are in a district of 10,000 students, that's not a very high percentage of your constituency that's actually trying to persuade or encourage you to take a stand or go a certain direction. So as a leader, you have to constantly think about what percentage or how large of group have I actually heard from on this given issue. I hope you find these tips helpful in trying to balance the voices that you hear from as a board member. Thank you.
Okay, let me get back to my PowerPoint here. Sorry, just a second. Okay. So what I was hoping that we could do before our next one, and I feel like I'm giving you so much to reflect about, but to really think about who in your community that you're not hearing from. And then, you know, that would prepare us to maybe have some more conversation to make sure that we're hearing from everyone that we need to hear from. And like I said, social media is what has really made this much more challenging. It's never been easy, but more challenging than it used to be. Okay, this is some of the chain of command I showed you before that I kind of wanted us to revisit. I just want, we don't really have time to completely get into superintendent evaluation. Let me ask quickly what your process is for superintendent evaluation, and do we need to schedule some time just to focus on that, because you know, we have a statute that we have to make sure that you're meeting. Comments from anyone?
So I know, you know, according to the statutes, we have to do an evaluation of our superintendent and board clerk pretty soon, I think in November. So I think Ms. Page and I and Mr. Goheen, and then the board had a discussion around evaluation and what we'll be evaluating our superintendent on. And so we'll be reaching out to Dr. Miguel to kind of go over the criteria that we'll be looking at to use for evaluation. So Ms. Page has been working with our legal counsel and
Okay.
come up.
And I know Greg pretty well, so.
Yeah, so she's been working with Greg, and then she reported out and presented to the board at the last meeting what those items will be. And so we just need to communicate with Dr. Miguel. Okay. Ms. Page, is there other board members that you want to share?
Are there any general tips that you have for best practice?
Yes, and they're going to sound very much like what we've just been talking about, but it's making sure, that goals have been established and you identify then what it looks like when those goals are achieved. Now, you are in a unique situation where you had a late resignation and someone in here. So some of this is going to be a little more challenging for you right now, because what would have been appropriate for Dr. Faust is not going to be appropriate for somebody who's just stepped into this role. So for right now, I think meeting the requirements of statute, you're in good shape with Mr. Goheen. But I do think it would be good to kind of go through this process of how those goals are established and looking at what it means to reach those goals. Like what is the kind of information or artifacts, what specifically do you want to see? Because, as the person being evaluated, I want to know as specifically as possible what it is that you're looking for, to know that I'm going to be evaluated on an identified goal. So yes, as you may have seen, I probably had 20 slides on that part, but it's not for your immediate statute needs. It's just more for good practice going down the road.
It's something I think we need to be looking at for the future, because when Gary went through it on the one workshop I was in, it was very, very easy to understand, but comprehensive.
Yeah.
And I think all of us could benefit from it, and I would really like to go through it again.
Okay. So I would like to, once again, I don't want to overplan an agenda. Boy, this is interesting. As you guys look at this too. But I'd like to put it on the agenda for our next one, but I want to make sure we nail down this norm stuff so it's not hanging out there. And we really need to be moving you towards that vision, because everything that you're doing, every decision, every financial decision, we need to make sure is on target for your collectively identified vision for the district. So let's see, Dr. Yeager and Mr. Lopez and I had come up with 2 Fridays going forward that we thought might work. Could we check on those now? And let's see, if one of you has it in front of you faster than me, go ahead. And
I would say, Randy, would you touch bases with Yolanda?
Oh, yeah.
I will do that. So it looks like the first date, and again, thank you, Marcia, for everything today. I think, like you said, it's important that we continue to do this self-evaluation of our board and the training. I think it's really helpful. And today's conversation, I think, has been really helpful for me as well. The first date I think that we looked at was November 6th. Is that right? It's a Friday.
Aren't we reviewing RFPs that day?
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah,
we could do RFPs on Saturday the 7th.
I can't do the 7th. Sorry.
We did bring up reviewing the RFPs, but that was the second review. We had reviewing the RFPs earlier and then announcing it on the 6th. So Randy and I was discussing to see if that would have been a shorter meeting.
Yeah, so on October 30th, we are doing interviews potentially with with those that submit RFPs, and then having conversation. On the 6th, we would, based on the timeline that we have, is to review and award. So we thought, we would have already done the interviews, and then so maybe that meeting wouldn't be so long. But if you all feel that that's could be a lengthy conversation. We don't want to overload the agenda.
Because Randy and I thought it may be like 30 minutes or less to announce who we awarded the contract to, and then we could go into the training.
I'm fine to train that day.
Since we already had that blocked off for another.
Well, I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
How many hours?
2 o'clock again?
But can it be 2 to 4, not 2 to 5?
Well, we barely ran out of time for this meeting.
Or 1 to 4?
I think Yolanda and I have problems doing earlier than the two. Earlier in the day, I think we needed.
I will though echo what Ms. Page is saying. We do know it taxes the brain more when you're doing Zoom than when it's in person. I mean, it's a different kind of intensity of paying attention. Did I freeze? If it's possible to do 2 and try to put 1 more in, you may have more focused attention without people getting tired at the end. You might end up more productive.
But could we start about the same time, either 2 or 3?
Yeah, 2 to 4 would be great.
And you have to consider Yolanda needs to be present.
What about 3 to 5?
That works.
Randy, would you ask her and clarify if 2 to 4 or 3 to 5 would be better for our schedule?
3 to 5.
3 to 5 would probably be better for Yolanda later in the day.
Yeah, I know in the past she's indicated later in the day works best, but I'm texting her now. I can send her a message, but I know she was pretty tied up today, so I don't know if she'll respond.
Yeah, she said she was in budgeting. Would 3 to 5 work for you, Marcia?
Yeah, I'm fine that my afternoon's wide open. So whatever works best for you. I want you as fresh as you can be.
And keep in mind, if we do 3 to 5, that we would probably then have our other meeting at the 2 o'clock time to do our RFP review. So that might work best instead of trying to start at 2, because then we'd have to start at 1 o'clock for our RFP. Does anybody have any concerns about trying to do both the same day? I know it was something that we discussed, but I want to be flexible.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah, I have a concern doing a double duty. I mean, the superintendent search is higher on priority than this, and that's what I'm just saying, so that we get it right.
I think from 2 to 3 would be enough time for us to make that selection.
Well, why don't we? I'm trying to look at everybody like Marcia with head nods, and maybe we can schedule or hold that time from 2 to 3 for our special meeting, 3 to 5 for this training. If we see that we need more time, I mean, maybe then we would have to push the training back a little bit. But let's at least get on the calendar so that we have it on there.
And then the second date was for November.
Yes. December 11th.
Okay, just a second.
Second date.
Just a second.
I thought it was November.
Yeah, that was November 6th.
Oh, I thought you said, never mind. Hello.
All right, so we're in November now?
No, so November 6th was the one that we just discussed to do the training.
Then December.
Then now we're in December. Okay.
December 11th.
I just thought of Christmas. I'm like, is it the end of the year that quick?
Dr. Yeager, stay on task.
What time? What, 3 o'clock or 2 o'clock or another 3 to 5?
3 to 5 is fine again.
Okay. 3 to 5.
Did you say that was December 11th?
Yes,
Yeah.
December 11th.
Got it. Thanks.
Friday.
And that's for KASB, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Where'd your dog go, Randy?
What's that?
Where did your dog go?
Oh, yeah, sorry. He was barking. That's why I had to get up and close the door.
Oh, okay.
Barking at the neighbors.
There he is. Okay.
Before you close out, I just want to thank you all again. These are hard conversations to have, especially on a Friday afternoon when you've got a whole week of exhaustion behind you. And I just appreciate so much the dedication you're showing and the work you're putting in. So thank you again very much.
Well, thank you, Marcia, for working with us. We appreciate everything KSAB has done to help us out.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you,
Hey,
Mark.
best of luck to you and your family, Marcia.
Thank you. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
For you and your family. Best of luck. Thank you, Marcia, for today. Bridget and Jamia, thanks for filling in today. Really appreciate it. Board members, thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate you on this Friday afternoon. Go enjoy your weekend. Have a great weekend, everybody. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.